We are continuing with Rabbi Yonasan Steif's work 7, the Sefer Mitzvot Hashem, which is part 3, which is dealing all about the 7 Noahide commandments. And we are currently up to page Reish Tzadik Vav, which would be 296. Top of the page. Reish Tzadik Vav, for those that have the book and are looking inside. Klolim ufrotim b'mitzvos b'nei Noach. So this is all the introduction. One of the introductions, I should say, this is his opening. And we may skip around a little bit, but in the meantime, I'm trying not to skip. All right? Generalizations and details when it comes to the Noahide commandments. So now we're up to Zion, section number 7, or subsection, I should say, number 7. We know that there are 7 Noahide commandments, all right? That's the official number, that's the famous number, and that, of course, is true and accurate. Having said that, Hine, B'chulin Tzadik Beis, in the Talmud, in Tractate Chullin, on page 92a, Omru, the rabbis of the Talmud state over there, Sheyesh shloishim mitzvos shekibul aleihem b'nei Noach. There are actually 30 commandments that the sons of Noah, the descendants of Noah, accepted upon themselves. Now one can ask an obvious question, which he's about to ask. Hu tamuha. This statement in the Talmud is difficult. That statement is bewildering. Why? Very obvious. The Sanhedrin Nun Vav, for in a different place in the Talmud, the more well-known one associated with the Noahide commandments, in the Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin, Nun Vav, page 56a, Lo nimnu ela zayin mitzvahs. Only 7 commandments are listed. And then in the small parentheses with a different kind of writing, this is known as Rashi script. So even if you know how to read, and even if you can read without the vowels, you still may have difficulty following these next few words because it's in a different type of a script. Vayin shom berashi uvagois meharav Ransburg. And he tells us, take a look in the Rashi commentary over there, and in the margin by another commentary there in the Talmud. So that's the obvious question. There's a contradiction. Are there 30 or are there 7? Okay, next paragraph. So now we're going to address it. However, ayin b'sefer HaChinuch. Take a look in the book called Sefer HaChinuch, which we've mentioned numerous times, just as the Rambam made his Sefer HaMitzvos, where he lists the 613 commandments, and he devotes a paragraph per commandment, sometimes very short, sometimes long. He basically tells you what the commandment is, and where the biblical source is, and where in the oral tradition in the Talmud it is discussed. Well, he's not the only one who did that. So there's a writing called Sefer HaChinuch, which he did the same, and for the most part, he agrees with the Rambam, but not always. There is a discrepancy. Everybody agrees that the number is 613. Question is, what are they exactly? And there we have different opinions. And much of this work of Rabbi Steif is actually going to be bringing in the Sefer HaChinuch quite a bit. He's going to be quoting the Sefer HaChinuch a lot. So in the Sefer HaChinuch, Mitzvah Tov Tes Zayin, in his listing, in the Sefer HaChinuch, that would be commandment number 416. Shekosav, that he wrote. And we quote the Sefer HaChinuch. V'al tite b'ni, and my son, do not be mistaken, b'zeh ha'cheshboin, in this counting, shel sheva mitzvos b'nei Noach, of the 7 Noahide commandments, hayodua, which is known, v'hamuzkar b'Talmud, and is mentioned in the Talmud. So don't make a mistake. What mistake should I not make? Says the Sefer Chinuch, ki ve'emes, for in truth, she'oisan sheva, those 7, hein ke'ein klalois, they are sort of like general commandments. They are generalizations. Aval, however, yesh b'hem pratim harbe, they have many specific details, each one of the 7. K'moi shata moitze, just as you find, sher isur v'arayos, that the prohibition of forbidden marriages and forbidden intimate relations, nechshav lohem, is considered and counted for them, for the Noachites, derech klal in general, lemitzvah achas, one commandment. All right, there are 7 commandments. One of them is prohibition of adultery. V'yesh pratim, and it has details. Kigoin, for example, isur aim, the prohibition of having marital relations with one's mother. V'isur achos min ha'aim v'chuli. And another prohibition would be a maternal sister, etc. In other words, when you say that they're not allowed to commit adultery, that doesn't just include one particular type of a case. There are numerous people that they're not allowed to have relations with, and any one of those would be considered adultery. At kan l'shoinoi, end of quote. Or literally, up to here is his language, is his wording. All right, so that seems to pretty much answer our contradiction. So says Rabbi Steif, ulefizeh, and according to this, yesh loymar, we can answer, she'oisan shloishim mitzvahs, that those 30 that the Talmud in Chullin mentions, nichlalim, are included, bichlal, in the generalization of oisoy hamispar shel sheva, of that number of 7, that code number that we all know, the 7 Noahide commandments, they include in detail 30. Umatzatzi b'sefer hamakne, chelik beis, b'soifoy b'hashmatois. And says Rabbi Steif, I found in a book called Sefer Hamakne, which is a well-known authoritative work on the Talmud. So it says over there at the end of the hashmatois, those would be the when you have something which was supplements, something which was left out of the actual original text, and then they put it like at the end of the book or something. So in that section, and now he quotes this Sefer HaMakneh, and take a look in a discourse which is called Chikur Din, which literally means analyzing the law, or investigating. Now in the parentheses, and this discourse is taken from another book called Asara Mamaris, the 10 Statements, from a very great sage who is well known as the Mareh of the Rameh of Panoi, in part 3, chapter 21. Shemifarshan, that he actually explains them. All right, so he tells you what the 30 are, and we are now about to explain the 30 and how they fit in to the 7. So that in itself could be quite interesting now, and it's just a small piece. It's pretty much the next page, or not even, just to the end of, we'll see. So we're going to have now the 30 and how they are really 7. 7 is in general, 30 is in more detail. Ve'eluhain, and these are they. Let us begin. Rishoina, the first of the 7 Noahide commandments, which will include in it a whole bunch. Remember, we're going to keep count. He's going to do the counting for us, don't worry. And we're going to see how at the end, the 7 equal 30. So this is the first of the 7 Noahide commandments. Aleph, the first one within the first. Avodah Zara, the prohibition of idolatry, v'nitfei lo yisei leha, or anything which goes along with it, with a secondary or a subdivision of that. Beis, number 2, within this prohibition of avodah zara. Ma'avir ba'esh. There's a particular prohibition, which is biblical, of course. It's right there in the Chumash, that there used to be, I don't know if it still exists, perhaps it does, a certain type of worship that people would give over their children or their offspring to the priests of this particular idolatry. And the way to do it was they would have their child or their offspring walk through a fire. Okay, they'd have to run across burning hot coals, and there was fire, I think, on both sides. And that's how their religious way of devoting, of giving over this child that was inaugurating or what have you to that particular thing. So that is a separate prohibition. Gimel, number 3, kisem. That would be what we would call magic or black magic. Dalit, number 4, me'oinein. So me'oinein would be the prohibition of it's a certain type of superstition where they would say that this time is good for this time is not good for this, and things like that, by behaving based on the particular time. Hey, number 5, minachesh. Minachesh would be that if, again, taking a sign from something that happens, like the examples given in the Talmud, and then Rashi brings it down in his commentary to the Chumash, to the Bible, that, for example, if somebody was walking and a deer stopped him on the road, or blocked him, or if a piece of bread fell out of someone's mouth or something, or maybe let's try to bring some more common ones that are like known even to just children in America, like if a black cat walks across your path, that being bad luck, things like that. Vav, michashef, which is another type of magic. And then in the brackets, parenthetically, he's asking a question on that one. Vitzarich iyun, in the brackets. And we need, there's a question here. The Hainu, ki Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbi Yossi b'Sanhedrin, the Sfira lehu af mechashef, v'anan le'kaim alon kein. So apparently Rabbi Steif, I think, is asking a question on it, parenthetically, that if you say mechashef, that would be following 2 opinions in the Talmud, in Sanhedrin, on 56, and that would be the opinions of Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yossi, that they hold that mechashef, that type of magician, is a separate prohibition for Noachites. Problem is, we don't follow that ruling. So how can we count it if we don't really follow it? But that's just a small question. Zayin. Choiver chaver. Number 7 is a certain type of another witchcraft where they would gather together like a bunch of snakes or scorpions or something and then do their magic or whatever. Ches, 8. Oiv. Where also It was another type of witchcraft. Yidoini, which again, another type where this one is they would take a small bone from a particular, very, very particular type of an animal, which was called yidoya, and they would, I think, put it in their mouth or under their armpit, and then it would speak, or they would hear the voice coming from the ground. And finally, Yud number 10, Doirei Shalamesim, to communicate with the dead, people that are no longer living, so to call upon these spirits and to communicate with them. Perhaps that one, if you know your prophets, you know the Nach. So the famous story with Shaul HaMelech, King Saul, how one of the great things that he did was he actually got the land of Israel rid of pretty much all of the idolatry that was there at the time, including all of these types of magic and sorcery and witchcraft. He got rid of it, and he succeeded, and people knew, so they all closed up shop. But the problem was that at a certain point, he was very, very desperate, and he wasn't getting answered in the proper means, the way he's supposed to communicate with Hashem, which generally would be through the breastplate of the high priest, where the stones and the letters of all the tribes were there. All the letters were there, so they would light up, and he was not getting any response. And he was desperate for an answer, so he wanted to speak to Shmuel, Samuel the prophet. Problem was, this is years after Samuel had already passed on. So he did go, he finally found out where there is one of these women that would talk to the dead, would bring up the spirits, and he came disguised to her, and he insisted that she do it, and he promised he won't disclose or say that she did it because it was very dangerous to do it. And she refused. She said, "No way." She said, "The king will find out, and then that's it. I'm finished." He tells her, "I promise you, I won't tell the king." Anyway, so finally she does call up Shmuel, Samuel the prophet, and then she freaks out because she thinks it was a setup and testing her or forcing her to transgress, because she then realized that this, in fact, is the king that she's with and who asked her to do it. Anyway, Harelu Esr Mitzvahs. So behold, we have in total 10. So the one prohibition of Avodah Zarah includes in its 10. So all of these things, this witchcraft and the sorcery and the various different things which are clearly listed in the Chumash, each one of these are in the written Torah, altogether equal 10. So there we have 1 out of the 7 is already 10. Shenis, the second category, which would be the second of the 7 Noahide commandments. Yud Aleph, so keeping count, number 11. In other words, this is number 1 of the second, but we may as well continue counting to get to 30. So we're up to number 11. Gilui Arayos, V'nitfalei Seileha. Adultery and all of the things which are secondary and go along with it. Yud Beis, number 12, part of this general mitzvah of Gilui Arayos, through Achas. Be fruitful, meaning have one child. Every human being is required to have a child. Yud Gimel, a separate commandment to make it number 13. Urevu, and multiply. Shtayim, b'mitzvahs aseh. So that's to have at least 2 children. Now, by the way, for the Jew, which, as I say many times, it's very, very clear what the 613 are, or at least, the details, etc., etc. So we know all the prohibitions and all of the obligations for a Jew. So a Jew is obligated to have children. That is the first commandment if you go in order of the Torah. The first commandment is Pru Urvu, and that was actually given before Avraham and before Judaism, so to say. This was said to Adam and then reiterated again to Noach. Pru Urvu. Now, the reason, the way it's explained, why does it say Pru Urvu, be fruitful and multiply? Because if it only said Pru, which means be fruitful, that could imply one child per person would be sufficient. But Revu, which comes from the root of multiply, or many, so that's at least plural, which is two. So for a Jew, there is actually a mitzvah to have at least two children. And there's a dispute in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, as to whether a person fulfills that commandment by necessarily having two sons. Would that be sufficient? Or must it be at least one of each gender, a son and a daughter? And the ruling, the halacha, the final verdict, and the way it is all the way down to the code of law, is one son and one daughter. So long as the person did not yet physically, biologically, bring into this world a son and a daughter, they're still required to try to continue to have children. So even if a person has 10 sons but no daughters, or 10 daughters and no son, they technically did not yet fulfill the mitzvah, the obligation, the commandment of having children. So now we're saying for the Noahides, without getting into the gender, but they also have a mitzvah to have two children, Pru or Revu. That would be this positive commandment of this prohibition of the negative of not to commit adultery. So the positive is have a son and a daughter properly, not in a forbidden way. And again, in the brackets, parenthetically, he's going to throw a question on this. Vitzarich iyun, but this requires some analyzing. Dibit Sanhedrin, because again, going back to Sanhedrin, where all this is discussed, and this time we're already holding at page 59b in Sanhedrin. Muchach, it comes out proven. To Pru loy nemar leven noyach. It seems like the Talmud's conclusion there is that this blessing or commandment of be fruitful and multiply was not said to the Noahides. Again, even though it was said to Adam and said to Noach, that could be that it's a blessing, not necessarily a commandment. Omnam, however, keinu divir Rashi yevamos samach beis dibaraskel b'nei Noach. And then he tells us to take a look in the Rashi in Tractate Yevamos. Vayin Tosfos Chagiga, and take a look in the commentary of the Tosfos in Tractate Chagiga on page 2b. Uve Marsha Sham, and in the commentary of the Marsha there in Chagiga, and he says, but I will address that much later in this writing of ours. Rabbi Steif will address that and he will answer that. But right now, at this point, he's just parenthetically raising the question of how can this Sefer, this book that we're quoting now, who's coming up with the 30, list two of them as having children be fruitful and multiply for Bnei Noach, but so it is. We'll see later. Yudalit, number 14, if you're with me. V'isur azchur afilu yachtov biksuba. The prohibition of male mating or being physically intimate with another male, behaving on homosexuality, even if they are married. In other words, even if they have a marriage document. So it's not just behaving in this disgusting form unofficially, but even if it's sanctioned and it's official, and they are quote unquote married with a marriage contract, it is still a prohibition for the Noahides to have two males engage in this behavior. Tesvav, 15. V'chile behema, and the crossbreeding of animals. Tezayin, 16. V'hasirus, and castration, to mutilate any male human being. Then there's the whole discussion. We're going to get to that also, about whether you're allowed to do that to animals, etc. Let's say a person has pets. They have a cat. They don't want to have a whole a bunch of kittens. They want so it's a problem. So now so that's another one, prohibition of actively making one unable to reproduce. Yud Zayin, V'harkavas Ilan, and the mixture, I don't know if it's called crossbreeding, of trees. To take one type of a tree, a branch, let's say, and to implant it in a different type of a tree of a different species. Harei Sheva. So behold, that gives us 7. Im Gilu Harai is counting the first one, the general one of the prohibition of adultery. So that gives us 7. So 7 plus the first 10. So we're holding at 17 so far. Next paragraph. Shlishis, the third of the 7. Yudches, which would be now number 18 in the count of the 30. Shpichus damim, spilling blood, murder. Yutes, that includes one more. Number 19. V'soiter loyoy shel Yisrael tfeila eleha. And striking a Jew is secondary for the Noahide to murder of a fellow Noahide. In other words, Noahide is not allowed to kill a human being. And if he hits a human being, he did not murder that person, so he hasn't transgressed murder. But if he strikes a Jew, that is like or secondary to murder. Harish time. So now we have 2 more. So 17 plus 2. That brings us now to the 19. Revius, the fourth one of the 7. Chaf, which would be 20. Birkas Hashem, blasphemy. Chaf Aleph, 21, within the category of blasphemy. Uchvoid HaTorah tefeila eleha. Honoring, respecting Torah for Ben Noach. Respecting Torah is secondary to the prohibition of blasphemy. So the positive act of showing honor to Torah is an obligation, is a commandment for them, and that's number 21, which would be part of the prohibition of blasphemy. Now, this one some of you may really like and appreciate. Chaf Beis, number 22. V'chein, and likewise, la'asoik b'Torah, to positively, to be involved in Torah study, shenitna lahem, that was given to them. Sheben Noach, for a Noahide, ha'oisek ba, who is involved, oisek, he is studying deeply, he's involved in Torah study, harehu k'choin gadol. Behold, he is like the high priest. Ayin Sanhedrin untes. V'hainu b'zayin mitzvos shelahen. Take a look in Sanhedrin 59b. And again, the emphasis is, but it has to be in their 7, because we know they're not allowed to study if it's not part of their 7. But anything that is part of, whatever that means, part of the 7 in the Torah, for a Noahide to study that is a positive commandment, which is under the general division of the prohibition of blasphemy. So this is the opposite of blasphemy. They would be doing a good thing by studying their part of the Torah, studying Torah as it relates to the 7 commandments. So we have 3 in this category, which so far brings us to a total of 22. Chamishis, The fifth one of the seven, Chav Gimel, which this one would be so far number 23, Gezel, stealing, prohibition to steal. Chav Dalet, in contrast to what we just said, number 24, under the category of stealing, Shaloi Lasek Batera, for them not to be involved in Torah study, Shehi Meirasha Elenu, for the Torah is an inheritance for us Jewish people, as it is explained, Kimavur Sham Sanhedrin, as that same Talmud in Sanhedrin 59 speaks about the positive of a Noahide being involved in studying Torah of their seven, so too it is absolutely prohibited for them to be involved in Torah study if it's not part of the seven, because the Torah was exclusively a gift for the Jewish people. It is the Jewish people's inheritance, and therefore, if a non-Jew studies Torah, which is not part of the seven, he is actually stealing. Harish time. So we have two in the general category of theft. So we're up to 24 so far. Shishis, number 6 of the 7. Chafei, which would be 25 of the 30. Adinin liyeshuvei shaloilam. Setting up court system, laws, in order to make the world civilized, inhabited. Chavav, number 26, within the category of dinim, of making laws, which basic would mean that they are not allowed to have holiday. They cannot make an official day off where they are forbidden to work. And we learn it out from the verse that after the flood, when everything settled and Noah came out of the ark with his family, etc., etc. So one of the things that Hashem says there is there's going to be seasons, there's going to be day and night, and all the seasons, lo yishboisu, they will not rest, or they will not cease. And from that we learn out that actually people, all of the Noahides, are not allowed to make for themselves any type of a Shabbos or a festival. Tfeila Eileha, which is secondary to dinim. In other words, you have to see to be proactive, and you need to make this world a proper place. So everyone has to be involved and preoccupied and have occupations to make this world a civilized world. Areshtayim, so that's another 2, which brings us to 26. Shvi'is, 7th and final one of the 7. Chav Zayin, which would be number 27 in the count of 30. Eiver Minachai, the prohibition of eating a limb that was detached from a living creature. And what is secondary to it? Chavches, to make it 28, dam min hachai, blood that came out of a living animal. The blood that came out of the animal before the animal was completely dead, that would be also prohibited. It's not a limb, it's blood. And again, parenthetically, v'tzarich iyun, this also requires some investigating to leikaimalon kain b'Sanhedrin, because in the Tractate Sanhedrin, we do not accept this view, and we say that Noahides are allowed to consume blood even though it came from the animal while the animal was still living. Nuntes, 59. I'm sorry, this is a mistake, it's a typo. Chavtes, sorry. Chavtes, 29. Nevela. Interesting. Nevela is an animal that died on its own. It wasn't killed. So he's saying that's forbidden for Noahide. Lamed, And finally, number 30. Basar min hames. Flesh of the dead, which meaning from a person. V'ayin mashakosov b'fnim achibur, and take a look what we're going to write about it. So again, we're going to get to it hopefully later, much later, where he's going to discuss that as well. Arei arba. So behold, in the seventh one, we have 4 for the one of Aver min achai. We have 4. Mispar kulam shloishim. The total number now thus is 30. V'ayin b'minchas chinuch. And then it tells us, take a look at the Minchas Chinuch Mitzvah Kuf Nun Dalid, Mitzvah number 154. Uvesefer Yad Eliyahu, Siman Memhei, Shnistapku Imever Minachai, Ubasar Minachai, Shel Adam Asur Ben Noach. Where over there, in these two mitzvah, these two books, the Chinuch and this other one, Yad Eliyahu, they're actually in doubt. They question as to whether Noahide is forbidden to have Aver Minachai from a human being or flesh from achai, from a human being, whether that's prohibited. We know it's forbidden for them to eat it from an animal, but what about from a human being? That's a question. All right. Let's do the next piece before we open up for comments and for discussion. Top of the next page. Zion. Okay. There's a mistake here, but nothing we can do about it because there's 2 Zion over here. So the count is going to be all wrong. They didn't miss anything. And what we did just now was this whole previous page was Zion. And now we're moving on. This should have been Ches, but then the next one is Ches and so on. So basically at the end, when it's going to be Yudal at 14, indeed, it'll actually have been 15. But there's 2 sevens. Be that as it may. Top of the page. V'hinei ksiv, behold, it is written in Bereshis, chapter 18, verse 19, where Hashem is speaking about Abraham. Ki yadativ, for I've known him, l'ma'an asher yitzave es banav, that he will command his children, v'esbeisoi acharav, and his household after him. V'shamru derech Hashem, and they will guard or keep the way of Hashem. La'asois tzedakah u'mishpat v'gomer, to do justice and righteousness, etc. That's the verse. Uvashas, and in the Talmud, Sanhedrin, 56b, Yalfinon, we derive from that verse that the word that Yitzave Elu Hadinin, that Vayetzav means that's a reference that he commanded to dinim, to having courts of law. Mida Kosav, since it says Asher Yitzave Espanav V'Gomer, that he, Avraham, will command his descendants. If so, we can learn from this that everything that is stated with regards to Avraham, Noahides are commanded. So whatever the Torah tells us that Avraham is commanded to do, even though he's 10 generations after Noach, and even though he is the father of the Jewish people, whatever is recorded in the Torah that is required of Avraham applies to all of the Noahides, because the Talmud is learning it out from a word that it says with regards to Avraham. V'im kain, if so, says Rabbi Steif, in the parentheses, muzharim b'nei Noach gamalat tzedakah. So since this verse says to do tzedakah umishpat, that means that according to that, Noahides are also obligated to do tzedakah, even though it's not one of the 7, nor one of the 30. Ulecha'ira, and apparently, mifurash kein b'Sanhedrin, it's actually explicit in the Talmud Sanhedrin 57b. Banav ledin, beisoy litzdaka, ayin sham. That we're learning out from the various words in that verse that we quoted, that from the word that he will command banav, his sons, that teaches us din, that they have to establish laws and courts. And when it says and his household, that teaches us tzedakah, charity. The Chinkas of Haran Sham, and indeed, so too wrote one of the commentaries known as the Ran, over there in Sanhedrin 56b, Bechidushav, in his commentary, the Lema'an, the Omar, the Yalif Dinim, Mivayetzav, Umidakas of Asher Yetzave, that according to the opinion in the Talmud, that says that we derive the mitzvah that the Noahides have of dinim, of making a court system, from the word vayetzav, and since by Avram it uses the same root word of yitzave, so indeed, Noahides are commanded. It's not just praiseworthy or nice. They're actually commanded on the mitzvah of tzedakah. V'tzarich iyun, but again, he's asking, we do need a little bit of analyzation here. Rambam in Maimonides, Perek Yud, Mehilchas Melachim, Halacha Yud, chapter 10, Halacha 10 of the Laws of Kings, where the Rambam over there speaks about it, and he does not take this approach. Vain biad shol, Siman Reish Nun Dalud, Marsha, Siman Nun Vav, and then he's telling us two other places where to look up. V'pirish Rashi b'maschil b'dinei kinas. Vain mashakasu b'zer Rabbeinu lahalon bo'is tzadik b'seidu dinei b'nei Noach lefi archim. Okay, the truth is, many of these parentheses may not be from Rabbi Steif. It could be that it's from the family, the grandchildren that put together or took his writings. So it's very possible that in his manuscripts, his writings, he doesn't have this. That's why they're putting it in parentheses with a different, so to say, font, different type of lettering to differentiate, and they're actually asking. So it may not be, the parentheses may not be from Rabbi Steif. At any rate, so today we say that there is much more than 7, even though the official number, of course, is 7, but there's 30, according to another place in the Talmud, and we just showed how they are details of the 7. And not only that, but we even added tzedakah, at least according to some. All right, and now it's time for anybody who has anything to share or ask or clarify or discuss, please.
James Gosnell.
James?
I'm sorry, I had it on my Hi, Rabbi Turin. Hi, Bob. Hi, everyone. How are we supposed to react and treat if we see misquotes in Torah, particularly from a rabbi like this? So, like, Shaben Noach Osek Ba Harehu Kohen Gadol. Forgive me if I mispronounce this. There in Sanhedrin at 59, it says a goy or akum. How do we handle these miscopies? How are we supposed to?
Why would we want to say now that there's any difference? A ben Noach is any human being who's a descendant of Noach, even if he did not accept or it's just ben Noach is the very generic term, which is, as far as we're concerned at this point, synonymous with goy. Akum is a problem. Akum is a problem because, as we've discussed many times, that's the censorship that really confused things, and it's like everywhere. But if we will substitute in the cases where it shouldn't say akum, and instead of saying akum, just say goy or nachri or ben Noach. Ben Noach right now, we say, means every human being that's not a Jew.
Based on what? Because that sounds like an assertion. Because we're not supposed to in other words, I can't read in, like, say, a Christian and say, well, it doesn't mean that, because based on the understanding, a certain logical understanding, it actually means this, and therefore I'm going to change Torah.
Ben Noach is any descendant of Noach. Is that not true?
That's not true. The Talmud
What is
actually quotes, and there's previous, I think Seth is called a ben Noach.
Is Shem a ben Noach?
Shem, yes, but before Noach, there were people that were called B'nai Noach. Therefore, it's not a category of dissension, like a biological thing. It's some kind of category or something else. But my
Where do we
point,
find, where is Chase called ben Noach?
I'd have to look it up. I want to say, it's got a Z. What's the offering of birds called? The tractate for birds.
You mean Kinim?
No, I'm sorry.
It's Zvachim?
Svachim. It's in Svachim.
Zvachim is not birds. Zvachim is all sacrifice.
Excuse me. Svachim.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's stated in Zvachim. I'd have to look at my notes. I want to say like 11 or 12. But people that were before Noach were called B'nai Noach.
You're saying it retroactively.
Right. Well, I don't know if it's retro. He was just called it that. So, like, my issue is just I have a problem, and this carries over just from my whole issues of going out of Christianity. People want to culturally assert things to the Torah rather than the Torah assert things to their culture. And I don't want to live by my culture and try and induce that into Torah. Rather, I want to live by Torah so it manipulates my culture. So I want to take things at face value, what they say, and not miscopy things. And I can't say, well, logically it means this, because from my perspective, nowhere in Torah have I ever seen that a ben Noach is somebody who's descended from Noah. Even though it even says child of Noah, there's other proofs that I could counterprove those things, such as Rambam and Hilkot 10:10, where he says a ben Noach that can give tzedakah and a goy can give tzedakah. Or in the Talmud, which would be the same era, in Sfachim, where it calls Shais ben Noach, which obviously he can't be a biological ben Noach.
Right, but I think anybody who is a biological descendant of Adam is a ben Noach.
Based on what?
Because ben Noach becomes the Torah generic term for anyone who's not a Jew. But then you have, okay, well, what about a person who's an Evet Kanani or a Ger Toishav? But until we bring in any other definition or any other category, all goyim are bnei Noach, even oivdei avodah zara. People that are categorically oivdei avodah zara, they're still bnei Noach. They're just transgressing. Ben Noach is required to keep the 7 Noahide commandments. It's sort of like a Ben Yisrael or Yisraeli who's not keeping his commandments. So he's still a Ben Yisrael. He's just a sinner.
I understand I understand that logic. I have never seen that axiom stated in the Talmud or in the Torah, excuse me. So I'm following your logic, but I'm just unwilling to completely accept that.
You know, our Chasidei Umay So'ilam B'nei Noach.
Not necessarily.
So I think
one is a different term than the other, which one, just on a linguistic level, signifies that something isn't necessarily the other. And until we have an actual description, some kind of the Torah definition say something else, I'm not going to assume. Because when I assume things, then I'm starting to create a chidush das, and I've seen how that can destroy people. It literally creates new religions. And that scares me.
so. What you want is to see clearly where in Torah the term Ben Noach clearly applies to anybody from Nebuchadnezzar to Stalin to Hitler, that they are all considered Bnei Noach.
Well, not necessarily, because then I could go and show you the difference between a goy and a ben Noach.
Well, that would see, like in the usage today, when we say a Noahide, so that could mean within the world of today that became someone who is keeping the commandments. But if you want to be literal or technical, even if the person is unaware, or even if the person is a heretic and doesn't believe and is an atheist or whatever, they're still a Noahide.
But a Russian Noahide.
Fine, that could be.
Okay,
Sure.
so let's follow that logic. So
Yeah.
a goy is a Russian Noahide.
Not necessarily. Goy simply means a non-Jew, because literally, as you know, it means a nation.
But we see counter proofs to that argument. For instance, in Hilchot Malachim 10:10 that was just mentioned, there's a ben Noach that gives tzedakah, and then there's a goy that gives tzedakah, two different dinim. There's mutual exclusivity between the two. They do not have the same dinim. One's a Russia ben Noach, basically, and the other is not. So there is a difference between a goy and a ben Noach.
So again, let's take the quote in Sanhedrin, that a goy that is oisek in Torah is like a kohen gadol.
Correct.
Okay, so
that's
the goy,
what it says. So for me, I would say I'd agree with that.
So what? How would you understand? Who are we talking about there? Who is involved in Torah study, and he is equated in a certain way to the high priest?
That would be the goy.
And what is the goy there?
Somebody who has a kingship who believes in a kingship other than Hashem, a nation that follows something else besides Hashem. Hashem is king of the world. They follow a king that is not Hashem of the world.
So what about? So what would you say then if a ben Noach studies Torah of 7 mitzvahs? What is he then? Not like a kohen gadol?
It doesn't say.
I understand. What's bothering you is the seemingly misquote.
It's not correct. Yes, I'm
asking you, right? But it's not like it says it the other way around. If the Talmud would say ben Noach, and he would quote it and saying goy, then you'd be bothered. I'm asking you if he's saying the lesser, the worse of the person. So now, what does that say about the ben Noach who's Isaac in 7 mitzvahs?
Well, then he would be closer to like a Yisrael that would be Oisek in the Torah. In other words, I think Rabbi Meir there is trying to draw a, and I'm not saying this is actual Torah. I'm just throwing this out as my own little kiddush, but I'm not going to run with it completely. But he's trying to juxtapose the lowest of the low, that such a person can study Torah, and as long as he is Oisek, not just Lamud, but Oisek in Torah, then he is like the high priest. He's trying to juxtapose such a lowly individual. Now, that's my own little kiddush, right? But that's, again, but realistically, it's not a ben Noach, so I'm not going to read into it further than that, really. It's dangerous to me.
But what you're saying is sort of a kal v'chomer. In other words, if it's the lowest of the low, the one who's only a goy, and yet he can become as great or as holy or whatever the meaning there is, like the kohen gadol. You can't get higher in rank or in holiness than a kohen gadol.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
The slingshot effect of going from the lowest and then uplifting the lowest, does that elevate to a higher degree than just something that's mediocre? In other words, we just learned in Tanya last week that the light of the Or Ein Sof itself isn't as bright, so to speak, as the light of the Or Ein Sof through a Jew that does Torah and mitzvahs. It elevates higher. And I think that's kind of what he's. So I don't think it's exactly what that is. I'm not, in other words, Ben Noach, wouldn't have Ben Noach be higher? I don't think that's what Rabbi Meir is talking about. But my point is, my real point is that it's just a miscopy. And I don't want to read beyond that because of creating a Chidush Das. That's dangerous from my experience.
So in general, I agree that if someone is quoting anything, they should be very accurate. That's in general. But I think that in the context here, where he's not making a distinction at all between Ben Noach or whatever, when he says Ben Noach, he means a non-Jew.
Right.
So,
I completely understand that position.
Yeah, so to say that a Ben Noach can be like a high priest, you're saying even a guy can be like a high priest. Okay, but a Ben Noach surely can as well.
Well, I'm not me. That's what the Torah says.
Okay, so no, but I'm saying you're making a distinction and you're defining what the Talmud means when it says goy. So according to
I wouldn't even say I'm doing that. I literally just want to take it at face value of what it says rather than so then I would go off and say, okay, well, what is a goy? That's a good question. I mean, it's beyond the scope, I guess, what we're talking about here. But my point is just being diuk, like where do we draw the line on misquoting Torah or not quoting Torah or saying, well, culturally it's this, and therefore I'm going to rewrite it as that. And that's so we don't have to.
Yeah, one moment. I want to look up something
exactly.
real quick.
And maybe it's a question that's kind of out of scope, and we just need to read it. I'm trying to take this book as his own, but at the same time, it bothers me. I think we went to go get a book, but
hold on. Let me see real quick. Let's see if I could find it. Give me one moment here.
The reason why it bothers me is because this is the big premise of a lot of non-Jewish books.
Yeah. Um. Well, I'm not. Okay. I don't know. I'm not finding what I wanted to see here. At least in the regular standard printed version of the Talmud, right? You with me?
Okay.
So again, there could be more accurate versions, which especially in the past couple of decades, in our generation, you're finding manuscripts and the earlier prints and everything of everything. And there's the uncensored version. But in the regular standard Talmud, where it speaks about the study of Torah by the non-Jew, where is that exactly? Sanhedrin what?
Sanhedrin 59.
And okay, and what do you
A.
recall? What do you recall it says over there?
Rabbi Meir,
Yeah, but who's the
she'afilu goy v'asik b'torah shehu kohen gadol.
It actually says Nochri.
Nochri, yeah.
So what's that? What's a Nochri?
Root word for Nochri is nacher, an unknown. So Nochri would be an unknown person.
And in rabbinic terminology in the Talmud, again, without getting into the censorship that confused everything, but let's just assume that they do use that word. How do the rabbis use the term Nachri? Because it's all over the Talmud. So what do they mean by that?
It appears to me like it would be an akum.
Akum is the censored version, which is an idolater.
Right.
Nachri is not an akum. Nachri is a foreigner, an outsider.
That would be a czar.
Yeah, Nachri is pretty much the same as a czar.
An unknown person. And it could be censored. It, like you said, could be censored. But why was it censored? Was it for clarification? Or was it because it didn't flow with the Christian printers? Or both?
Could be. I don't know.
Svachim 116a. It was Avil was considered a ben Noach. Was called a ben. Abel. Avil.
Oh, Hevel.
Hevel. See, thank you. Yes.
Right. Okay. So that's what I'm saying. Cain and Hevel, and even Adam himself, they're Noahides, meaning non-Jews.
Abraham was called a ben Noach.
Right. Until the giving of the Torah, all of Bnei
Yisrael. Right. After he accepted, it was changed. His merit changed him, but.
So I'm just looking here because in the edited talk of the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach from 1985, where he quotes this piece of Gemara of Nachri v'Oisek B'Torah, that he's like a Kohen Gadol, and I just want to see. I don't want to. Speaking of misquotes, does he then refer to that person as a? Yeah, it seems like Ben Noach and Umay Sa'ilam, and in this case Nachri, it's all the exact same. Like when we say Umay Sa'ilam, who's that? Who are the nations of the world?
The people of the concealment, the people of the world. But there's also Hasidim Olam.
Right, those are within Umay Sa'ilam, the ones that have raised them.
Well, let me put it this way. Let's go back to the Russia ben Noach and there's the Stam ben Noach. There's also different dinim between a Russia Yisrael and a Yisrael. Certain things that you treat such a Yisrael with, who's not doing something right compared to one who is. And that's kind of that's another logical avenue that is opened up with this, which is these are different dinim, and that flows with the piece of just about every single text, including the Rambam in 10:10 about the tzedakah. In other words, I'm very uncomfortable with changing changing the din, or being able to switch out and say the din of the goy is the same as the din of the ben Noach. And I'm perfectly fine with saying that all of B'nai Noach should be doing the 7. I'm perfect, that's. But when it comes to these other dinim, I feel more comfortable. Like, well, it's a Russia ben Noach, so to speak. So.
Okay.
And until I see I don't have to change the Torah in order to do that.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm not trying to convince you of that. We kind of went on that. My original question was just like, what do we do? So I just take it at face value of what he's saying.
Well, in his defense, okay.
Yeah, sure. I'm down with that. Let's hear it.
It's I'm just trying.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love
in his
bouncing new ideas.
defense, he's not quoting, he's paraphrasing. And
Okay.
then in the parentheses, again, assuming that it's his grandchildren or whoever worked on all these manuscripts and published this, they're saying, take a look in Sanhedrin 59b. But all he's saying, which is not even him, whatever he's quoting from this other books, is that that for them to be involved in Torah that was given to them. And then he says, that's paraphrasing. So therefore, he's not sticking to the word nachri, as the Talmud says, but he's talking about a ben Noach. And then they're saying, where'd he get that from? So take a look in the Talmud there.
Gotcha. Okay. Right. Well, hey, you said at the beginning of class, you even said this isn't it's like this isn't a posik din, basically. You said it was
100%. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's cool. No, I can read it like that.
Okay. All right, we are out of time, gentlemen. Or
Thank you, Jeff.
any ladies.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you very much. Very interesting.
Okay, so we are up to the next little section here, and we're going to talk a little bit about Ger Toishav, just a little bit, in the next section, and that's it. We don't have that much left for this part, but then we do have what he just quoted over here from the Ramemi Pano. So they're gonna actually bring it down completely in the next little section. Okay, all the best, everybody. We are looking, as far as I know, at next week, same time,